Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Political Excess. Let's do a deep dive into another governor's election. Let's take a look at Minnesota. So let's get on Ballotpedia and get a little bit of background about this race. The incumbent governor is Democrat Tim Walz. He's running for re-election to a second term. 4 years ago, when he first won election, he won by over 11 points, with almost 54% of the vote. Prior to serving as governor, he did serve 6 terms in the U.S. House. His opponent on the Republican side is Scott Jensen. Jensen is a doctor, and he previously served in the Minnesota State Senate. So let's go back and take a look at their primaries. And I realize it's technically the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, but to make things simple, we're going to just say the Democratic Party. And Tim Walz, in his primary, he was essentially unopposed, as he won with 96% of the vote. On the Republican side, Scott Jensen, he also was nearly unopposed. He won with about 91% of the vote. And I know Jensen did receive the backing at the state convention, so that essentially let him bypass a real competitive primary. There will also be several third-party candidates on the ballot as well, and those actually might take away some votes from Tim Walz. Let's move on and see how this race is rated. And the Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball, they all have it at likely Democratic. And my most recent rating at the beginning of the month was leans Democratic. It was borderline likely. For a while, it did seem like Tim Walz was going to win this comfortably, maybe even by double digits. But once Scott Jensen settled into being the Republican nominee, the race did seem to narrow up just enough to where it actually could be competitive. I do think Tim Walz is the favorite still, but to me, Scott Jensen comes off as non-threatening. He's not overbearing. He's not in your face. And given the national environment, that could play well enough to actually get it under a 5-point margin for Tim Walz. Could Scott Jensen pull off an upset? Yeah, I guess now it does seem like that is a possibility at this point, but I would certainly bet against it. There's still some time, so we'll see what happens. And down here is the campaign finance. There's not a whole lot of money flowing into this race, but Tim Walz, of course, does have the advantage as he is the incumbent. Let's go down farther and take a look at how the counties are trending on a presidential level. And this shows us that almost 52% of the population lives in 9 counties that are solid Democratic, and that is defined in Ballotpedia as having voted for the Democrat for president in the last 3 elections. On the other end, 38.6% of the population lives in 59 counties that are solid Republican. And those, of course, voted for the Republican for president in the last 3 elections. There's another 15 counties with 5.8% of the population in them, and those are trending Republican. Those counties voted for Barack Obama back in 2012, but switched to Donald Trump in 2016 and stuck with him last time. There's 4 more counties that voted for Barack Obama, then Donald Trump, and then switched back to Joe Biden. So let's go down here and take a look at some of these counties. And remember, the shading does not indicate margins. It just indicates if they voted for the Democrat or the Republican for president in the last 1, 2, or 3 elections. If we hover over any of these counties, it will show you the margins from those elections. And let's start with the most populous county, which is Hennepin. That has Minneapolis in it, and that was a 43-point margin for Joe Biden. And as you can see, that has trended toward the left over the last 3 cycles. Ramsey County with St. Paul, it's another population-heavy county, and that also went for Joe Biden last time, by slightly less of a margin, but it's still overwhelming. And the rest of these counties surrounding these blue counties, they either decisively voted for Biden last time or narrowly went for Trump. Up here in the Iron Range, these counties have long voted for Democrats, and there actually doesn't appear to be a lot changing on a presidential level. St. Louis County does have a decent amount of population in it, but that also has the city of Duluth, so it hasn't really been able to trend too much to the right. Next to it, Lake County, it has very little population in it, but that did come very close to flipping and voting for Donald Trump in the last 2 elections. Even a county like Olmsted, which has Rochester, that also has trended to the left. Republicans do have a lot of deep red counties, and these lighter red counties are actually trending toward the Republican as they did vote for Donald Trump both times. But Minnesota as a state seems to be a little bit behind the rest of the country in political polarization. A lot of these rural counties voted Republican, but not by overwhelming margins. Plenty of them gave Donald Trump less than 60% support, definitely less than 70% support. There's actually very few of these counties that actually did go above 70% for Trump last time. There are a lot of legacy Democrats in Minnesota, more blue-collar and working class, that have traditionally supported the Democrats, and they have yet to really come around to supporting the Republicans, at least in any great type of numbers. the Twin Cities and the surrounding suburbs have trended much farther to the left much quicker than these more sparsely populated red counties. So that explains why Minnesota rarely elects a statewide Republican, and they have not elected a Republican for president since back in 1972, although Donald Trump did get very close back in 2016. So let's get on YouTube and see what they've got on their channels. Here is Tim Walz. He's got a steady supply of content and things related to his campaign. Here is Scott Jensen's channel. He has some campaign events, some ads, and a steady supply of content as well. And we could also take a look at their official campaign websites. Here is Tim Walz if you want to read about him or donate, see what he's up to. And here is Scott Jensen's channel if you want to see where he stands on the issues, donate, buy any of his merch, etc. So how about any debates? Well, there already was one debate, and that will apparently be the only televised debate. You can see it right here if you haven't watched it yet. I did watch most of this debate. It's nice to see them going at it. I don't know how much it's going to help Scott Jensen, but we'll see what happens. There was supposed to be another debate, October 23rd, but it says Tim Walz will not be attending, so instead it will just be a conversation with Scott Jensen. So it's a little disappointing if Tim Walz does not want to have additional televised debates. But let's switch over to Wikipedia and take a look at the polling. On Real Clear Politics, Tim Walz is ahead only 2.5 points, 46.5 to 44.0. On 538, Tim Walz is ahead 8.9%, 49.1 to 40.2. So that is a wide gap in the aggregate between Real Clear Politics and 538. Let's go down here and take a look at the individual polls. The most recent poll from Trafalgar actually shows Scott Jensen ahead 46.3 to 45.8. So that is a statistical tie. It's a dead heat, and it is from Trafalgar. Might have a Republican bias, or maybe they're picking up on how this actually is a really tight race. All of the other polls do show Tim Walz with a lead, usually by mid to high single digits. I do hope to see some better polls out of Minnesota before Election Day. It does seem like the race has tightened, but there's not a clear enough picture to have a lot of confidence in how close it actually is. Let's compare these poll results to 4 years ago, back in 2018 when Tim Walz first won election, and he had almost 54% of the vote. Jeff Johnson had 42.5%. That final poll from Change Research was very close, and most of the rest of these polls were off by a few points, underestimating one candidate or the other. And again, I do wish there were more polls out of Minnesota. But finally, let's get on PredictIt and take a look at the market. And this has the Democratic Party, Tim Walz, at 73 cents favored to win. Scott Jensen, the Republican Party, he's at 29 cents. And if we look back on the graph history from the last 90 days, Tim Walz was easily in the high 80s, even over 90 cents at one point. So it has narrowed considerably over the last week. I would say it's just on the outside of being competitive right now. And if Scott Jensen does keep this momentum up, it's possible he could win it at the end. I would still think he's not going to pull it off. Minnesota is still mostly a blue state. It's kind of a political oddity. Tim Walz is the incumbent. He's going hard on the abortion issue. But on the other hand, Scott Jensen, I don't think he's really that polarizing in terms of his personality. He has the background as a doctor. It's probably going to help him a little bit. But also Scott Jensen is probably not really going to excite the Trump base too much. But that might help him win over some of those suburban swing voters. It's probably going to be a better bet for a Republican to try to win once there's an open seat for governor. But that is a look into this Minnesota governor's election. Let me know down below in the comments. What do you think about this race? Is it actually narrowing? Or is Tim Walz going to win easily by 8 or 9 points? Let me know down below. And if you enjoyed this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.